Welcome to Short Movie Channel. The movie begins with a very famous architect named Jimmy. He's speaking at a conference about perfection, whether in work or in family life. After Jimmy finishes his talk, he signs books and takes pictures with fans. Then his close friend John shows up and takes him away because Jimmy has a flight to catch and he's running late. As they head to the taxi, Jimmy gives John some advice. He tells him to move on from the accident that happened 20 years ago, try to meet new people, and be more social instead of living in isolation. John thanks him for the advice, they say goodbye, and Jimmy leaves. The accident Jimmy referred to is the disappearance of his wife Isabel, who vanished 20 years ago. He hasn't been able to get over it, and has been living in her memory ever since, refusing to get into any new relationships. While he's on the way to the airport, there's heavy traffic and everything is at a standstill. Suddenly, a beautiful young woman knocks on his car window. Jimmy rolls it down, and she tells him she urgently needs a ride to the airport because no taxis are stopping for her. After hesitating for a moment, Jimmy agrees to give her a ride. As they drive, Jimmy learns her name is Texel. He relaxes when she tells him she knows who he is, but when he asks if she attended his conference, she says she just read his name from the title of the book he was carrying. She introduces herself and says she's from the Netherlands. Then Texel suddenly realizes she left her bag on the side of the road and asks him to go back and get it before continuing to the airport. Even though Jimmy is already late and might miss his flight, he agrees to help. On the way back, Texel starts talking too much. She even explains the meaning of her name, letter by letter. Jimmy gets annoyed by all the small talk. Eventually, they make it to the airport. Jimmy grabs his bags, says goodbye, and walks off. But when he checks in, he finds out he missed his flight. He calls John and explains what happened, then mentions he booked another flight 2 hours later, so he'll just wait at the airport. After the call, Jimmy sits alone, opens his phone, and scrolls through the photos he took with fans. He starts reading people's comments and deletes any negative ones. Suddenly, Texel shows up again and tells him she missed her flight too and will stay with him to kill time. She keeps chatting aimlessly, which really annoys Jimmy. He tells her he doesn't want to talk and blames her for making him miss his flight, and now she's giving him a headache with her nonstop talking. Texel keeps pushing until Jimmy opens up and starts telling her more about himself. He finally admits he's the architect who designed the entire airport. Texel is impressed by his work and asks him to join her for a drink to make up for bothering him and for causing him to miss his flight. After some convincing, Jimmy agrees. While they're having drinks, Texel suddenly asks him if he's ever killed anyone. Jimmy is stunned by the strange question and thinks she's joking, until she tells him she killed someone when she was a kid. Now he's really curious and asks what happened and who she killed. Texel says she'll tell him her whole life story in 3 parts. The first is disgusting, the second is terrifying, and the third is about friendship and love. But to hear her story, she wants him to close his eyes and imagine everything in detail. Jimmy agrees to the strange request and closes his eyes. Texel begins telling her story. She says when she was 10 years old, she lived with her mom's creepy husband, and 3 cats in a small trailer. Texel had a problem with food. Her mom couldn't cook, and because of that, her mom's husband would always beat her. Jimmy is shocked and asks how her mom reacted to her husband hitting her. Texel explains that no one loved her, and her mom would punish her even after the beatings by making her prepare food for the cats. The cat food was disgusting, made from dead animal parts, and Texel had to prepare it with her own hands as part of the punishment. She says the disgusting part of her story is that one day she started eating that nasty cat food just to prove to herself it wasn't really a punishment. Jimmy laughs and tells her he knows some good therapists because she clearly needs help. Texel gets upset, says she won't bother him again, and walks away. So Jimmy follows her and apologizes, telling her that he won't make fun of her again. She forgives him and asks him to come have lunch with her. When Jimmy goes with her, he tells her he hasn't seen anything in her story that involves murder yet. She tells him she was only giving him the introduction. Then she starts telling him the real story. When she was 12 years old, There was a girl at school who was good at everything: schoolwork, talents, manners, you name it. She says she was extremely jealous of this girl because she seemed perfect. Her family was rich and loved her a lot. Even though the girl was her friend, the jealousy and envy filled her heart. One day, she kept praying and wishing that the girl would die. And the next day, she found out at school that the girl had a heart attack and actually died. She tells Jimmy that this is the scary part of her story. Jimmy tells her she's not responsible for the girl's death, and it was probably just a coincidence. But when he doesn't seem convinced, she tells him she killed someone else. Jimmy says he's had enough of all this talk about killing and these creepy stories, so he walks off. He heads to the bathroom, but then finds that Texel followed him inside, and she's holding a small knife she says she uses to clean her teeth. Suddenly, Texel disappears, and Jimmy rushes out of the bathroom, terrified. He sits alone, thinking about everything Texel told him, until he sees her walking toward him again. He quickly puts on his headphones and starts blasting music so he won't hear her. Texel comes up and keeps talking, but when she realizes he's ignoring her, she puts her feet up on his chair and says she won't take them down unless he takes the headphones off. So Jimmy takes them off. Then he notices something strange. Texel is wearing a certain pair of socks that caught his eye. He remembers seeing a girl at the conference wearing the exact same socks, and her hair color was identical to Texel's. He tells her he knows who she really is, that she seems obsessed with him, and that it makes sense now since she was at the conference even though she denied it when he asked. He pulls out his phone and calls John. He asks him to check if there was a girl named Texel at the conference. After doing some digging, John tells him that no one by that name was there. So Jimmy sends him a picture of the girl he suspects and asks John to find out who she is. John tells him the girl in the photo is named Alice. Jimmy thanks him and hangs up. He then asks Texel to show him her passport to prove her real name. She refuses at first but finally gives in, and her passport does say her real name is Texel. She tells Jimmy she's now going to tell him the final part of her story, about friendship and love. Jimmy agrees to listen, wanting to figure out who she really is and what she wants from him. She explains that when she was a teenager, her mom ran away with another man and left her with her stepdad. So she had to leave the house after her mom left and make her own way. She moved to Paris to start over. While she was in Paris, she used to visit cemeteries a lot because she loved a certain statue that was there. She also tells Jimmy that she met a beautiful, kind-looking girl there and felt like maybe this could be the lifelong friend she had always wanted, someone to make up for all the chaos in her life. So Texel walked up to the girl and tried to start a conversation, but the girl ignored her completely and walked away. Texel felt hurt and upset. She started following the girl around, and when the girl noticed, she got scared and ran away. Texel chased after her, and in the heat of the moment, she grabbed her and hit her with a rock, without even realizing what she was doing, and the girl passed out. At that moment, Jimmy is completely shocked by what he's hearing, and Texel continues her story. She tells him that after that, she dragged the girl to a spot in the cemetery, tied her up tightly, and suddenly started laughing hysterically for no reason. Then out of nowhere, the girl got up, hit Texel, and managed to escape. Jimmy tells her she's mentally ill and needs to see a doctor as soon as possible. He tells her she has no empathy or sense of guilt. But Texel insists on finishing the last part of her story. She continues and says that 2 years after the cemetery incident, she spent all that time searching for the girl everywhere to apologize and become friends. She looked for her all over Paris, but with no luck, until she eventually gave up hope. But one day, by coincidence, she saw her sitting and eating at a restaurant. Texel saw that as a golden opportunity and started following her. This time, she approached her again, but the surprise was that the girl didn't even recognize Texel at all. It had been 2 years, and Texel's appearance had changed drastically. So, Texel pretended to be an old school friend who wanted to visit and spend the next day reminiscing about their childhood. The girl agreed, gave her the address, and told her to come by the next day. Jimmy is listening to all this, confused and afraid at the same time. He can't understand why she's telling him all this. Texel keeps going. She says she visited the girl the next day, and they sat and chatted and laughed. And while they were laughing, the girl suddenly recognized Texel's laugh. She quickly stood up and backed away. Texel told her she was happy she hadn't forgotten her and tried to get closer, apologized, and pulled out the same knife Jimmy had seen her with earlier. She handed the girl the knife and asked her to kill her. The girl took the knife to try and defend herself. When Texel got closer, they started fighting, and eventually, Texel stabbed the girl. When she killed her, she learned the girl's name was Isabel, and that after the murder, she hid the body well and committed the perfect crime without ever getting caught. That's when Jimmy is hit with the biggest shock. Texel tells him that Isabel was his wife, who went missing 20 years ago. Jimmy gets up and walks away, dizzy and overwhelmed. He can't believe what he just heard. He goes to the bathroom and splashes water on his face. At that moment, Texel follows him and says she was the one who killed his wife. She begs him to kill her in return and get revenge for what she did. He loses his temper and hits her, yelling that his wife's disappearance was the worst thing that ever happened to him. When he calms down, he tells her that her story doesn't make sense, she's still young, and his wife disappeared 20 years ago. That means Texel would have been a child back then, too young to have killed his wife. Then Jimmy hears the final boarding call for his flight. He leaves and boards the plane, still in disbelief, feeling like something's off. As he sits and reflects on everything that just happened, he suddenly decides to get off the plane and go back to Texel. He meets her again and asks if she really killed his wife. But she tells him she's done telling stories. Now, she wants to hear his. Jimmy begins telling his side. He says that back when he and Isabel first moved here, she started avoiding him completely. One day, they had a huge fight because he suspected she was cheating on him. After the argument, he left the house. That's how their fights usually went. Because of that fight, he was distracted at work. At that time, he was designing the airport. So the next day, Jimmy came back to Isabel with flowers, trying to make peace. But by coincidence, he found out she had booked a flight to the Netherlands. She was planning to leave him. Despite that, he tried to approach her, but she pushed him away and they argued again. Jimmy was heartbroken and left. He says that was the last time he saw her. A few weeks later, he went to visit her but found the apartment empty. In the bathroom, he saw a positive pregnancy test. Isabel had been pregnant. Jimmy tells Texel, "That's my story. Now tell me, did my wife really die or not?" She tells him to lower his voice because he's still on the plane. Jimmy looks around and realizes he never actually left the plane. He's still on board. His mind can't make sense of what's going on. Then, he sees Texel on the plane, but no one else can see her. That's when we realize Texel isn't real. She's a manifestation of Jimmy's own mind. Jimmy tries to escape this realization and locks himself in the plane's bathroom. Texel is actually his conscience, buried deep for years. We learn that the story about the woman, her husband, and the cats was actually Jimmy's own childhood. He was the jealous one in school, envious of others. And more importantly, the story he told about Isabel wasn't true. The real story is, when Jimmy found out Isabel had booked a flight and was leaving him, his pride and ego couldn't handle the rejection. He grabbed the same knife he kept seeing in Texel's hands and killed her. Then, he took her to the construction site for the airport and buried her body in the concrete. He got away with the perfect crime. No one ever discovered it. Back on the plane, he imagines concrete pouring into the bathroom. Texel appears behind him, his guilty conscience coming back to life after all these years, triggered by being at the very airport where he buried his wife. Texel tries to drown him in the imaginary cement, a symbol of his guilt finally catching up to him. Jimmy remembers his wife was pregnant with his child, and the guilt overwhelms him. But then we see Jimmy imagining a happy memory with Isabel, trying to convince himself everything was fine. He manages to get up from the cement and buries Texel in it. Symbolically, he buries his conscience again, just like before. Jimmy steps out of the bathroom and returns to his seat, acting completely normal. He's now ready to go on living without a heart or conscience, just like he had for the past 20 years. And the movie ends. If you liked the movie, give us a thumbs up and leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.